now, we will move into the speakers. So first, I'm pleased to welcome Quinn Brady, who is the project director for Uplift Central Coast. And she's going to tell you all about the exciting things happening in this state-supported 6-county regional economic planning activity called Uplift Central Coast. Quinn.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. Glad to be here with everybody and share a little bit about Uplift Coalition. We're a newer group, a newer initiative working together across the 6 counties. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about what we're doing, why, and what you can expect over the coming months for those who haven't been directly engaged yet. So as I mentioned, Uplift Central Coast is a 6-county partnership, the Santa Cruz down through Ventura. So we're working together collaboratively with multiple organizations, agencies, and lots of committee members from across the region to bring together an inclusive economic resilience plan for our 6-county region. On the next slide, I'll share a little bit about where this began. California Jobs First is formerly known as SURF, or the Community Economic Resilience Fund. It was renamed by the state just a couple months ago, just to kind of keep everybody a little bit more confused about what we're doing. And it's really a 2-phase project. It came together through funding from out of the COVID times, which many of us are still in and kind of navigating through. And that funding was to really seed and invest in regions to create their own resilience plans and how they would grow. As the state looked at all of this across the state of California, recognizing that every county and region had different opportunities and challenges, and one plan would not work for everyone. So Uplift Coalition was awarded that funding to bring together and orient and direct, kind of guide this planning and implementation phase. So we've been working together since February. Right now, we are in this planning phase. Over the past 8 months, we've been bringing together and working in collaboration with our committee members from across the region to drive a really inclusive, diverse, transparent process of bringing community members together, facilitating really deep research to understand what the barriers to economic opportunity are and what the opportunities are for our 6-county region, and where some of those differences might be from the northern parts to the southern parts, and what some of the opportunities for collaboration are in general. Over the next 6 months or so, we're going to be using all of the research and community engagement that we've been collecting so far to move into a strategy phase, which I'll talk a little bit more about, which will then begin an implementation phase of funding. We've applied for $14 million from the state in Catalyst funding, which I'll also talk about to begin that implementation. And we have not, we'll find out later this month, hopefully, if we're awarded that funding, and that'll be an exciting next step. But one of the things that we really know is that initiatives like California Jobs First reflect an ongoing evolution of economic development to address economic shifts that have narrowed opportunity for so many of the regions and the residents that call the Central Coast home. So this is really building on traditional approaches that have in many ways fallen short to create a more equitable opportunities for the community members who live here and can carry the weight of our community on their backs. On the next slide, just really briefly, this project was brought together by 3 agencies: Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, which many of you are familiar with in your area, REACH, which is San Luis Obispo, and the EDC in Ventura. And our work is really around bringing together this broad coalition that reflects the diversity of the Central Coast, conducting comprehensive industry and workforce analysis, which we've just come through and we'll be really excited to share with everyone this month, and then starting to prioritize a plan and strategies and initiatives that prioritize access to high quality jobs, really hone in on industries that are ripe for growth, and that we can also bring underserved, underrepresented, historically left out and disinvested community members to the table and into jobs, and then recommend a series of investments to grow those industries and continue to invest and drive funding back to the Central Coast. On the next slide, this is just kind of everything that we do is at the center of this North Star. So really combining economic opportunity, equity, and sustainability to guide our overall stakeholder engagement, how we listen to the community, what our priorities are, how we've done research. And it's really what our charge is to our many committee members. And I see Christina Chavez-Wyatt is here, who serves on one of our committees. And so really everything that we do, all the conversations that we have is through this lens. Speaking of the governance committees, one of the things that we're charged by the state to do is to bring together these specific represented stakeholder groups to serve on our committees and lead this project. So each of these chairs, these seats at the table, are represented by a committee member on our two northern we have a northern and a southern sub-regional steering committee, and then one vision committee. Altogether, it's 34 people that are governing, guiding, making decisions about how this project will grow. And then they will be the ones to really vote on and recommend those strategies and investments in the long run. A little bit just to touch on kind of what we've been doing in community engagement to date. On the next slide, this is sort of just a snapshot of some highlights. As I mentioned, we have currently 33. We've got one open seat of committee members that are serving and guiding this project. We've held many committee meetings across the Central Coast over the last few months, surveyed and gathered hundreds of data points, and we've actually really brought together all of the existing strategies by cities, counties, DART, and analyzed what is being recommended, what's working already, and what some of those barriers are. We've engaged with over 1,600 community members, many of those in listening sessions of 10 or 15 people. So we've been doing a lot of work to really get into communities and understand what some of those barriers are for people. Many of those listening sessions have been conducted in Spanish or Mixteco, going to where people are, really making sure that we're hearing voices that have not historically been at the table for these type of planning processes. We also have an inclusivity fund that I'm, as a part of the project, I'm really proud of, where we have set aside over $1 million to resource individuals and organizations for participation. And so we distribute that as $100 to pay people for their time, to invest their time, expertise into the project as they attend listening sessions, and also to support community-based organizations to be a part of that process. On the next slide, we have a few kind of key components of how we're doing this engagement, both in listening sessions to really understand the lived experience of our community members. And we're entering a time that will, if you kind of follow along with what we're doing over the next few months, many of you we'd love to have you engaged in issue and industry specific roundtables, where we'll start to be bringing together everything that we heard in the research and learned in listening sessions, and devising strategy together in those roundtables and in our committee meetings. So stay tuned, because there's lots to come in that. Just really wanted to show this, and hopefully maybe these slides will go out to everybody afterwards, but we have contracted with community-based organizations across the Central Coast to help lead this the community engagement and listening sessions portion. So there's several in the northern region, and hopefully some of these organizations look familiar, and maybe you've already worked with them in the past, but great to connect with them. If you have ideas about communities that you hope to see engaged in this process, you can reach out to us or these organizations who are doing a lot of work to make sure that people are engaged and their voices are heard, and we're understanding really what those pain points and challenges are. So where we've been recently, we've been doing a huge body of work and a huge lift to put together our regional plan part 1, which is a deliverable to the state. On the next slide, I kind of just broke down here that we've got these kind of 3 sections that are coming out. This regional plan, we just submitted it to the state at the end of December, of over 200-page report that I'm really proud of. We're excited to share with all of you publicly by the end of this month, and along with an executive summary for those of you who don't want to read a 200-page report of all the data that we've collected. But it will just be kind of some high-level learnings, and then we'll move that into in June. We will submit our final deliverable to the state, which will be all of the recommendations of those strategies, initiatives, and projects. So it's a really, really ambitious, quick timeline. And I'm really grateful to our committee members and just an incredible team who have been really lifting something that hasn't been done before. And there's not a lot of examples of around the state or the country. What it looks like in these reports is we're composing a full regional summary, labor market analysis, industry cluster analysis, really trying to understand a prioritization of industry clusters for intervention, and what that can look like in partnership with workforce development, yeah, and kind of the innovative ecosystems that already exist and what can be built upon. So stay tuned for that. We're hoping to release it. It'll for sure be released publicly by the end of this month. And there's a lot of really great, thoughtful information in there, informed by the community, and local researchers, as well as researchers from all over that have been helping us really dive deep into the understanding of the Central Coast. I'm not going to dive deep into these next slides just for the sake of time, but want to just say that a lot of our work, we've really heard this community on the pain points: lack of quality jobs, high cost of living, high cost of housing, lack of childcare. There's a real underdeveloped infrastructure in many places, and Spanish and English language proficiency resources are lacking. And over 1 million Central Coast residents belong to families who struggle to make ends meet. So these are like incredibly big numbers. It's a really big charge. It's something that I feel every night when I go to bed, now that we know the information, and have really heard the voices of our community, and also are collecting all of this data. So we can dive deeper into this in the report you'll see. And actually Uplift is going to be hosting a online community forum I'm going to share some information about, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into breaking this down and what these numbers mean, what this struggling working families mean, that there's this over 1 million people in our region, and how we're defining struggling, and then some of the recommendations that we are going to start to surface that might be possible as we move into a strategy phase. I'll also just mention that we conducted a public opinion poll of over 1,200 residents, and learned a lot of information that way as well, and got a really good snapshot into some of the disparities and kind of where the state of our region. Overall, yeah, on that last slide, I would say, like, there's a lot of these things that aren't going to be a surprise to anyone. Our region faces significant barriers to growth, yet we have pathways to sustainable quality job creation, but knowing that we have real constraints. So there's so much here that I would love to share, and you'll be able to see a lot more of that in our report. But for the purposes of our work, we're really talking a lot about what it looks like to increase access and availability of quality jobs that lift those families from that struggling family status, and move people into jobs that are able to provide for them and their families, and allow them to stay and thrive on the Central Coast. And the Catalyst funding is the next phase for the beginning of implementation. This funding is really designed to bridge the gap between planning and regional economic development strategies and implementation projects. So the plan that we've created and submitted to the state, and the strategies that we're going to recommend, are not just a plan to sit on a shelf. We will be immediately implementing and drawing funding down to start these initiatives, and put some money and continue to fund positions to go and look for extra dollars to pull down to the Central Coast, and fund the work that's being recommended and informed by the community. The Catalyst funding, just to kind of put this in your mind on the next slide, is really for exploratory and last mile projects. So this means feasibility studies, de-risking bolder, more transformational ideas that might not traditionally receive funding, which I think is a really exciting concept. And then there is still a pot of over 200 million at the state level for implementation funding for ready to go projects that Uplift can support once we have those strategies, and we'll have a pathway for organizations and agencies to come in and apply for funding and partnerships across the region for those exploratory projects, last mile projects, and then for support on implementation funding. The timeline of that is, you'll see, we hope to hear an announcement about the awards in January, and in the summer, we'll release a proposal review process that will be designed by our committees, and then decided upon by our committees after we've released the strategies that the Uplift Coalition comes up with over the next few months. And just to close, I mentioned earlier on the next slide, we have a community convening coming up to talk a little bit more about all of this work and what to expect over the next couple of days. If you go to the next slide, it's on January 25th. And I'll actually put in the chat the registration link for that. And I'm kind of touching on a lot high level here, but would be going in depth in this time about what we've learned so far and what the community can expect on ways to engage in the future and timelines for bringing those strategies together and drawing in funding that people might be able to apply for initiatives and work that they're doing. And with that, I'm really grateful to have the space. Thank you so much for the time.
That was fantastic, Quinn. A lot of ground to cover in a short period of time. And I think you'll find with all the speakers tonight, they could each chew up the full amount of time with what they have to offer. And so, yeah, indeed, this is intended to be just a quick taste of big things happening. And this is certainly one of them from the standpoint of reimagining an economy for the Central Coast. In fact, this is happening all over the state. And so it's just great to see this progress. And indeed, a number of our community-based organization partners and industries are engaged and focused on this planning activity. So I think you already have had lots of input from the Monterey Bay area, and you will continue to have that. So thank you, Quinn, for the presentation. And I see you put the link in the chat, and that reminds me, pay attention to the chat. So that's where if you have questions or comments, we'll be monitoring that closely, and that will allow us to capture the questions. And even if we don't have time to answer them all tonight, there can be follow-up. So thank you, Quinn. So